The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete steps of the federal building in downtown Los Angeles as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her dress blue uniform one final time. Today marked her last day of active duty after 12 years of service in the United States Marine Corps. At 34, she had seen combat in Afghanistan, led training exercises across 3 continents, and earned the respect of every Marine who had served under her command. But none of that seemed to matter now as she faced the reality of transitioning to civilian life. Maria had always been different from her peers. Growing up in East LA, she was the daughter of immigrant parents who worked multiple jobs to keep their family afloat. Her father Miguel cleaned office buildings at night, while her mother Carmen worked in a garment factory during the day. They had sacrificed everything to give Maria and her younger brother Carlos opportunities they never had. When Maria announced at 18 that she was joining the Marines, her parents were terrified but proud. In their neighborhood, military service was often seen as either an escape route or a last resort. But Maria saw it as something else entirely, a calling. The Marine Corps had been her home, her family, and her identity for over a decade. She excelled in every assignment, from her initial training at Paris Island to her deployments overseas. Her fellow Marines respected her not because of her rank, but because she earned their trust through actions. She was the sergeant who stayed behind to help struggling recruits, the leader who shared her rations with hungry soldiers, and the Marine who never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself. But military life had taken its toll. 3 deployments to Afghanistan had left their mark, not just physically but emotionally. She had lost friends, seen too much death, and carried the weight of decisions that haunted her quiet moments. The transition to civilian life seemed overwhelming. Unlike many of her fellow Marines who had families waiting for them or clear career paths mapped out, Maria felt adrift. Her marriage to her high school sweetheart had ended during her second deployment, unable to withstand the strain of military life. She had no children, no corporate connections, and no clear sense of what came next. The federal building housed the Veterans Affairs office where Maria needed to complete her final paperwork. As she climbed the steps, she noticed how her legs felt heavy, not from physical exhaustion but from the emotional weight of this transition. Each step seemed to echo with the finality of her decision. She had turned down multiple opportunities to re-enlist, despite pressure from her commanding officers who recognized her value. Something inside her said it was time for a new chapter, even if she couldn't see what that chapter would contain. Inside the building, Maria navigated the familiar bureaucracy of government offices. Forms to sign, documents to file, benefits to transfer. The process was mechanical, almost surreal. With each signature, she felt pieces of her identity being filed away in manila folders. The clerk behind the desk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, processed Maria's paperwork with the same indifferent efficiency she probably applied to hundreds of other veterans. "Congratulations on your service, Sergeant," the woman said without looking up. The words felt hollow, automatic. Maria nodded politely but said nothing. What was there to say? Thank you for acknowledging 12 years of sacrifice. Thank you for recognizing that this transition terrifies me more than any combat zone ever did. As Maria left the Veterans Affairs office, she decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator. She needed time to think, to process what had just happened. The stairwell was empty and quiet, a stark contrast to the busy hallways filled with government workers and other veterans completing their own bureaucratic journeys. Her footsteps echoed in the concrete space, a rhythmic reminder of all the miles she had marched, all the obstacles she had overcome. On the 15th floor, Maria heard something that made her pause. It was faint at first, a sound that didn't belong in the sterile environment of a government building. As she continued climbing, the sound became clearer. Someone was crying, not the quiet sniffling of disappointment, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone in profound pain. Maria stopped climbing and listened more carefully. The sound was coming from above, somewhere in the upper floors of the building. Her military training kicked in automatically. Someone was in distress. The civilian world might teach people to mind their own business to avoid getting involved, but 12 years in the Marines had taught her something different. When someone needed help, you helped. No questions asked. She quickened her pace, taking the stairs 2 at a time now. The crying grew louder as she climbed higher. On the 32nd floor, she found the source. Sitting on the concrete landing, still wearing his dress blue uniform, was a young Marine. He couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with the kind of fresh-faced appearance that marked him as relatively new to the service. His uniform was impeccable despite his emotional state, every ribbon in place, every crease sharp. But his shoulders were shaking with sobs, and his face was buried in his hands. Maria approached carefully. In situations like this, good intentions could sometimes make things worse. "Hey, Marine," she said softly, using the tone she had perfected over years of leadership. It was firm enough to get attention, but gentle enough not to startle. "You okay?" The young Marine looked up, and Maria could see the embarrassment in his eyes along with the pain. He quickly tried to compose himself, wiping his face with the back of his hand and attempting to straighten his posture. "I'm fine, ma'am," he said automatically, though his voice was thick with emotion. No, you're not, Maria replied, sitting down on the steps beside him. And that's okay, what's your name, Marine? Private First Class Johnson, ma'am, Tommy Johnson. His voice was barely above a whisper. Well, Tommy, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, and I've been in the Corps long enough to know that Marines don't sit in stairwells crying unless something's seriously wrong. You want to talk about it? Tommy looked at her uncertainly. Marine culture emphasized strength, resilience, and the ability to overcome any obstacle. Admitting weakness, especially to a senior non-commissioned officer, went against everything he had been taught. But something in Maria's demeanor, perhaps the genuine concern in her voice or the way she sat beside him as an equal rather than standing over him as a superior, made him open up. I just came from the medical board, ma'am, he began, his voice breaking slightly. They're going to discharge me, medical discharge, my leg. He gestured to his left leg, and for the first time Maria noticed the slight way he favored it when he moved. What happened to your leg, Tommy? IED in Syria, ma'am, 6 months ago. I thought I was fine, you know. I mean, I can walk, I can function. But they say there's nerve damage, that it's going to get worse over time. They say I can't meet the physical standards anymore. The words came out in a rush as if he had been holding them in for weeks. Maria felt her heart clench. She had seen this story too many times. Young Marines full of hope and dedication, whose service was cut short by injuries sustained in the line of duty. The medical discharge process was necessary but brutal. It stripped away not just a career but an identity, leaving young men and women adrift in a civilian world they no longer felt connected to. How long have you been in, Tommy? 2 years, ma'am. I was supposed to do 4, maybe even re-enlist after that. This was my career, you know. I didn't have much before the Corps, grew up in foster care, bounced around a lot. The Marines were the first place I ever felt like I belonged. And now, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Maria understood completely. The Marine Corps wasn't just a job for people like Tommy or for people like herself. It was home, family, purpose, and identity all rolled into one. When that was taken away, especially suddenly and through no fault of your own, the loss could be devastating. Where are you supposed to go now? She asked. Back to North Carolina. That's where I was stationed before this whole medical thing started. I have to clear out my barracks, turn in my gear, sign more papers. Tommy's voice was flat now, drained of emotion. I don't know what I'm going to do after that. I don't have family, don't have civilian skills. I don't even know how to write a resume. Maria looked at this young Marine and saw herself 12 years ago, scared, uncertain, but trying to project strength she didn't entirely feel. The difference was that she was ending her service on her own terms after a full career. Tommy was being forced out just as his career was beginning and through circumstances beyond his control. You taking a flight back? She asked. Tommy shook his head. Can't afford it, ma'am. Used all my leave money helping my foster mom with her medical bills a few months ago. I'm taking the bus. 42-hour trip. He managed a weak smile. At least it'll give me time to figure out what to tell people when they ask what I'm doing with my life. Something stirred in Maria's chest. Call it instinct, call it the Marine Corps values that had been drilled into her for 12 years, or call it simple human decency. But she knew she couldn't walk away from this young Marine who was facing the hardest transition of his life with no support system and no resources. What floor were you on when this happened? She asked. The medical board, 47th floor, ma'am. Maria looked up at the stairs stretching above them. They were currently on the 32nd floor. That meant Tommy had been planning to walk down 32 floors in his emotional state, probably hoping no one would see him break down. The thought of him suffering alone, trying to maintain his military bearing while his world fell apart, was more than she could stand. Tommy, she said, standing up and extending her hand to help him to his feet. I want you to listen to me carefully. You're not alone in this, and you're not walking down these stairs by yourself. We're going to figure this out together. Tommy looked up at her with confusion and something that might have been hope. Ma'am. First things first, you're going to get home to North Carolina, but you're not taking a 42-hour bus ride. Not today, not in the state you're in. Maria was already formulating a plan, the same way she had done countless times in combat situations. Assess the problem, identify resources, execute the solution. Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept charity. It's not right. Maria smiled for the first time all day. Even in his lowest moment, Tommy was holding onto his pride and his principles. That told her everything she needed to know about his character. This isn't charity, Marine. This is Marines taking care of Marines. It's what we do. As they began their descent down the stairs, Maria's mind was racing. She had been dreading her transition to civilian life, unsure of her purpose or direction. But sometimes purpose finds you when you least expect it. Sometimes it comes in the form of a young Marine sitting in a stairwell needing help that only another Marine can provide. The echo of their footsteps in the stairwell seemed different now. Not the hollow sound of isolation, but the steady rhythm of two Marines moving forward together. Maria didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter was about to change both of their lives in ways neither could imagine. The bureaucratic end of her military career had felt like a closing door, but helping Tommy was about to open a window to something entirely new. As they reached the 20th floor, Maria realized that her legs no longer felt heavy. For the first time in months, she had a clear mission: get Tommy home safely. Make sure he had the resources and support he needed for his transition. Show him that leaving the Corps didn't mean leaving behind the values and brotherhood that had defined their service. She didn't know that their journey together would attract the attention of hundreds of Marines around the world. She couldn't have predicted that a simple act of kindness would spark something much larger. All she knew was that a fellow Marine needed help, and she was in a position to provide it. The afternoon sun was beginning to shift as they continued down the stairs, Maria matching her pace to Tommy's slightly uneven gait. They talked as they walked about his injury, about his fears for the future, about the challenge of translating military experience into civilian opportunities. With each floor they descended, Tommy seemed to stand a little straighter, his voice growing stronger as he realized he wasn't facing this transition alone. By the time they reached the ground floor, Maria had made several decisions that would reshape both of their futures. But that was still to come. For now, it was enough that two Marines had found each other in a moment of need, proving once again that the bonds forged in military service extend far beyond active duty. The glass doors of the federal building reflected their images as they walked toward the exit, two Marines in dress blues, walking together with the same purposeful stride that had carried them through years of service. Behind them, 47 floors of stairs stretched upward, each step a testament to perseverance, brotherhood, and the simple truth that sometimes the most important missions are the ones you never see coming. The bustling atmosphere of Los Angeles International Airport felt overwhelming after the quiet intensity of their conversation in the federal building's stairwell. Maria had convinced Tommy to let her buy him a plane ticket to North Carolina, but not without a significant battle of wills that lasted 3 hours and involved 2 cups of coffee, a detailed discussion of Marine Corps values, and Maria finally pulling rank in the most compassionate way possible. "Look, Johnson," she had said, sitting across from him in a small diner near the airport, "I'm giving you a direct order. You're going to accept this help, you're going to get yourself home safely, and then you're going to start building the rest of your life. That's not a request." Tommy had smiled despite himself. "You can't give me orders anymore, ma'am. I'm being discharged, remember." "Once a Marine, always a Marine," Maria had replied firmly. "And Marines don't abandon each other, ever." Now, as they waited in the departure lounge, Maria found herself studying Tommy more carefully. Beneath the obvious pain and uncertainty, she could see the qualities that had made him a good Marine. He was observant, noticing things other people missed, the way he automatically scanned exits when they entered a room, the respectful way he interacted with airport staff, the careful attention he paid to his appearance even in his emotional distress. These weren't just military habits. They were character traits that would serve him well in civilian life if he could learn to see them as assets rather than remnants of a career that was ending. "Tell me about your foster mom," Maria said as they watched planes taxi on the runway. "The one you helped with medical bills." Tommy's expression softened immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, she took me in when I was 16 after I'd been bounced around the system for years. Most people just saw a troubled kid with anger issues, but she saw something else. She never adopted me officially, I was too close to aging out of the system, but she treated me like her own son. Taught me about responsibility, about thinking before acting, about having goals bigger than just surviving to the next day." "Sounds like she saw what the Marines saw in you," Maria observed. "Maybe she's the one who suggested I consider military service when I was struggling to figure out what to do after high school, said I needed structure and purpose and that the military might give me both." Tommy paused, staring out the window. "She was right. The Corps gave me everything I was missing: discipline, brotherhood, a sense of belonging. And now? And now you're going to take everything the Corps taught you and use it to build something new," Maria finished. "That's what Marines do. We adapt and overcome." Tommy looked at her skeptically. "Easy to say, ma'am, harder to do when you don't know where to start." Maria pulled out her phone and began typing. "What's Mrs. Patterson's address?" "Why?" "Because I'm going to send her a care package, and I want to include a letter explaining what an exceptional young man she helped raise. And because she's going to be part of your support network as you transition." Maria continued typing. "You're also going to give me your contact information, and I'm going to check in with you every week until you're settled." "Ma'am, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Maria's voice carried the authority of someone who had led Marines through combat zones. "You think this is about charity, but it's not. It's about responsibility. I'm a senior NCO, and you're a Marine who needs guidance through a difficult situation. That makes this my job." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible above the airport announcements. I've never had anyone fight for me like this before, except for Mrs. Patterson. Well, now you have two people, and by the time we're done, you're going to have a whole network. Maria's fingers moved across her phone screen. I'm connecting you with a veterans organization in North Carolina. They specialize in helping young veterans with career transitions. I'm also sending your information to a Marine I know who works in logistics management. He's always looking for good people, and your military experience will be exactly what he's looking for. You're doing all this for someone you just met. Maria stopped typing and looked directly at Tommy. You want to know something? This morning I was sitting in a government office, feeling sorry for myself because I didn't know what came next in my life. I was so focused on what I was losing that I couldn't see what I might be gaining. Helping you has reminded me of something important. What's that? The mission doesn't end when you take off the uniform, it just changes. Maria resumed typing. I've spent 12 years taking care of Marines. Maybe my next chapter is figuring out how to keep doing that as a civilian. Their flight was called, and as they gathered their belongings, Tommy moved with the slight limp that had ended his military career. Maria noticed how he tried to minimize it, the way he positioned himself to put less weight on his damaged leg. She also noticed how he still carried himself with military bearing despite everything: straight spine, alert eyes, respectful demeanor. As they walked toward the gate, Maria made a decision that would surprise even her. Tommy, I want you to think about something while you're on this flight. Yes, ma'am. I want you to think about starting a nonprofit organization, something that helps young veterans transition to civilian life. You've got firsthand experience with the challenges, you understand the emotional impact, and you've got the military background to relate to people going through the same thing. Tommy stopped walking and stared at her. Ma'am, I don't know anything about running a nonprofit. I don't have business experience or funding or. You have something more valuable than any of that, Maria interrupted. You have authenticity. You know exactly what it feels like to sit in that stairwell, wondering if your life has any purpose outside the military. That's not something you can learn in business school. As they reached the boarding area, Maria continued outlining her idea. Think about it. A program that pairs young veterans with senior veterans who have successfully made the transition. Mentorship, job placement assistance, emotional support, maybe even financial aid for education or training programs. And where would the funding come from? Maria smiled. Leave that to me. I've got 12 years worth of contacts in the military and defense contracting world, people who believe in taking care of veterans, people who would fund something like this if they knew it was being run by people who genuinely understood the problem. Tommy was quiet as they boarded the plane, but Maria could see him processing the idea. She had planted a seed, and she could tell it was beginning to take root. Sometimes the best way to help someone find their purpose was to show them how their pain could become their power. During the 5-hour flight to North Carolina, they continued their conversation. Tommy shared more about his background, the series of foster homes, the behavioral problems that stem from feeling unwanted, the transformation that occurred when he found structure and belonging in the Marines. Maria shared her own story growing up in East LA, the pressure of being the first in her family to pursue higher education through military service, the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated environment. You know what's interesting? Tommy said as they flew over the Rocky Mountains. This morning I thought my life was over, like actually over. I couldn't see any future that didn't involve the Marines. But listening to you talk about this nonprofit idea, I'm starting to see possibilities I never considered. That's because you're looking at your experience differently now, Maria replied. Instead of seeing your medical discharge as a failure, you're starting to see it as preparation for a different kind of service. It's scary though, the idea of starting something from nothing. Of course it's scary, every worthwhile mission is scary. But you know what I've learned in 12 years of military service? The scariest missions are usually the most important ones. As their plane began its descent into Charlotte, Tommy was already sketching ideas in a notebook Maria had given him. Names for the organization, potential programs, ways to reach veterans who might need help. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Maria found herself caught up in the excitement of building something meaningful from the ground up. What would we call it? Tommy asked. Maria thought for a moment. Something that captures what we're really doing. We're not just helping people transition careers. We're helping them maintain their sense of purpose and brotherhood. Semper Fi Forward, Tommy suggested. I like that, Semper Fi Forward, honoring where we came from while moving toward what comes next. As they collected their luggage in Charlotte, Maria realized that her spontaneous decision to help Tommy had evolved into something much bigger. She was no longer just helping one young Marine, she was laying the groundwork for an organization that could help thousands. The thought should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt energizing. Tommy's foster mother, Mrs. Patterson, was waiting for them in the arrivals area. She was a small woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of warm smile that immediately made you feel welcome. When she saw Tommy, her face lit up with relief and joy. "There's my boy," she said, wrapping him in a fierce hug. "I've been worried sick since you called yesterday." "Mrs. Patterson," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. She's the one who helped me get home." Mrs. Patterson turned to Maria with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what you did, but when Tommy called yesterday he sounded hopeless. Today he sounds like himself again." "He helped me as much as I helped him," Maria replied honestly. "Your boy has given me a new sense of direction." Over dinner at Mrs. Patterson's house, they outlined their plans for Semper Fi Forward. Mrs. Patterson listened intently, asking questions and offering suggestions. Her background in social work provided valuable insights into the challenges of serving vulnerable populations. "The hardest part will be reaching the people who need help the most," she observed. "Pride keeps a lot of veterans from asking for assistance. They see it as weakness." "That's why it has to be veteran to veteran," Tommy said. "When Maria found me in that stairwell, I could trust her because she understood. She'd been where I was." As the evening progressed, their informal planning session became more structured. Maria found herself naturally taking on the role of strategic planner, while Tommy's insights into the emotional and practical challenges faced by young veterans shaped their program design. Mrs. Patterson's questions helped them think through implementation challenges they hadn't considered. "How will you handle the geographic spread?" she asked. "Veterans are everywhere, but resources tend to be concentrated in major cities." "Virtual mentorship," Maria said immediately. "Video calls, online support groups, digital resource libraries. We can create community even when people are physically separated." "And for situations that require in-person intervention," Tommy added, thinking about his own crisis in the stairwell. "Regional coordinators," Maria replied. "Experienced veterans in major metropolitan areas who can respond quickly when someone needs immediate support." By midnight, they had filled a legal pad with notes and were researching nonprofit incorporation requirements on Mrs. Patterson's laptop. What had started as a simple act of kindness was becoming a comprehensive organizational plan. "You realize what you're taking on, don't you?" Mrs. Patterson asked as she brought them coffee. "Starting a nonprofit is like adopting a child. It becomes your responsibility 24 hours a day." Maria and Tommy exchanged glances. "Mrs. Patterson," Tommy said, "this morning I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it's just beginning. Whatever challenges we face, they can't be worse than feeling like you have no purpose." "And I've spent 12 years in the Marines," Maria added. "I know how to handle responsibility." As they prepared to call it a night, Mrs. Patterson pulled Maria aside. "I want you to know something," she said quietly. "In all the years I've known Tommy, I've never seen him light up the way he did tonight when you two were planning this organization. You haven't just given him hope, you've given him a mission. For someone like Tommy, that's everything." Maria nodded, understanding completely. She had seen the transformation in Tommy throughout the day, from the broken young man in the stairwell to the excited entrepreneur sketching program designs. But she had also felt a transformation in herself. For the first time since beginning her transition from active duty, she felt energized rather than anxious about the future. As she settled into the guest room Mrs. Patterson had prepared for her, Maria reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been dreading her transition to civilian life. Now she was co-founding a nonprofit organization with a young Marine she had never met before yesterday. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had gone to the federal building to end her military career, and instead she had found a way to continue her mission of taking care of Marines. Sometimes the best way to move forward was to hold on to the values that had brought you so far. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her former commanding officer. "Heard through the grapevine that you're starting something big. Whatever you need, just ask. Marines don't let Marines fight alone." Maria smiled as she typed back, "Thank you, sir. I think this is what I was meant to do after the Corps." Outside, the North Carolina night was quiet except for the sound of wind in the trees. Inside, two veterans were beginning to dream about an organization that would change lives, including their own. The longest day of their lives was finally coming to an end, but their real journey was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Maria and Tommy first met in the stairwell of the federal building, and their lives had changed in ways neither could have anticipated. Maria had extended her stay in North Carolina indefinitely, working from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table to lay the groundwork for Semper Fi Forward, while Tommy completed his military outprocessing at Camp Lejeune. The kitchen had become their unofficial headquarters, with Mrs. Patterson serving as an unofficial advisor and chief morale officer. The walls were now covered with organizational charts, program outlines, and contact lists. What had started as a spontaneous idea during their flight had evolved into a comprehensive business plan. Okay, let's review where we stand, Maria said, looking up from her laptop on a Tuesday morning in late November. We've got preliminary approval for 501c3 status, thanks to your friend Sarah's legal expertise. Tommy, who was reviewing applications from potential regional coordinators, nodded. And we've got 12 veterans confirmed as founding mentors spread across 8 states. Each one brings different specialties: career counseling, financial planning, mental health support. Mrs. Patterson poured fresh coffee and settled into her chair at the table. Over the past 3 weeks, she had become an integral part of their operation, bringing her social work experience to bear on program design and policy development. What about funding? Better than expected, Maria replied, pulling up a spreadsheet. The initial crowdfunding campaign raised $47,000, mostly from Marines who heard about us through word of mouth. But the real breakthrough came yesterday. She paused dramatically and Tommy looked up from his paperwork. Don't keep us in suspense. Anderson Defense Solutions wants to be our founding corporate sponsor. They're offering a $100,000 grant to get us started, plus in-kind donations of office space and administrative support. Tommy's eyes widened. The defense contractor you used to work with in Afghanistan. The same one. Turns out their CEO's son went through a rough transition after leaving the Army 2 years ago. He sees what we're doing as filling a critical gap in veteran services. Maria's excitement was evident in her voice. But there's more. They want to introduce us to other defense contractors who might be interested in supporting veteran transition programs. Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly. You two have unleashed something bigger than you realized, haven't you? Before either could respond, Tommy's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his expression grew serious. It's Sergeant Martinez from Camp Lejeune, the one I told you about, the Marine who helped me when I first got my medical evaluation. He answered the call, and from Maria's side of the table, she could hear both sides of the conversation. Sergeant Martinez's voice was strained, urgent. Johnson, I need your help. There's a situation here, and after hearing about what you and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez are doing, I thought maybe you could advise me. What's going on, Sergeant? We've got a Marine, Lance Corporal Williams, who just got his discharge papers. Similar situation to yours, medical discharge due to a training injury. But this kid is in rough shape, really rough shape. He's been talking about ending it all. Tommy's face went pale. He looked across the table at Maria, who was already reaching for her car keys. Where is he now? Tommy asked. Barracks room. We've got someone with him, but he's not responding well to counseling from the chaplain or the psychologist. He keeps saying they don't understand what he's going through. Because they don't, Tommy said grimly. Sergeant will be there in 2 hours. Don't leave him alone and don't let anyone lecture him about how his life isn't over. Right now, he can't see past the end of his military career. You're coming here, Johnson. You don't even officially work for this organization yet. Tommy looked at Maria, who was nodding vigorously. Sergeant, this is exactly why we're building Semper Fi forward. This Marine needs someone who's been where he is, who understands what he's feeling. We'll be there. The drive to Camp Lejeune was tense. Maria had called ahead to inform the base command of their arrival, leveraging her military credentials to gain access. Tommy spent the drive researching everything he could find about Lance Corporal Williams. Age 20, from rural Kentucky, joined the Marines straight out of high school, injured during a training exercise that damaged his shoulder beyond repair. This is our first real test, Maria said as they passed through the base gates. Everything we've been planning, all our theories about veteran-to-veteran support, this is where we find out if it actually works. What if we can't help him? Tommy's voice betrayed his anxiety. What if we say the wrong thing or we're not enough? Then we try anyway, Maria replied firmly. Because trying and failing is better than not trying at all, and because no Marine should face this alone. Sergeant Martinez met them at the barracks entrance. He was a stocky Marine in his late 20s with the weathered look of someone who had seen multiple deployments. His relief at seeing them was obvious. Thank God you're here. Williams hasn't eaten anything in 2 days, hasn't slept much longer than that. He's scared, angry, and convinced his life is over. The command is talking about putting him on suicide watch. That's the last thing we want, Tommy said immediately. That'll just make him feel more isolated, more like there's something wrong with him. What's his background? Similar to yours, actually. Small-town military family, saw the Corps as his ticket to something better. He's good at his job, was good at his job, and took a lot of pride in being a Marine. The injury happened during a combat training exercise. He was helping a teammate who got pinned under equipment, wrenched his shoulder so badly that he's lost about 60% of his range of motion. Maria absorbed the information quickly. So he got hurt helping someone else. He's probably dealing with guilt along with everything else, wondering if the sacrifice was worth it, if he should have made a different choice. Exactly, and his family back in Kentucky doesn't understand why he can't just get over it and find a regular job. They keep telling him he should be grateful he's alive and healthy. Tommy winced. I've heard that one. People who have never served don't understand that being a Marine isn't just a job, it's who you are. They climbed the stairs to Williams's barracks room, their footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway. Maria found herself thinking about that day in the federal building stairwell, how the sound of Tommy's crying had drawn her attention. Now they were the ones responding to a cry for help. Sergeant Martinez knocked softly on the door. Williams, it's Sergeant Martinez. I've got some people here I'd like you to meet. The voice that answered was barely audible. I don't want to talk to any more counselors. These aren't counselors, Martinez replied. These are Marines, Marines who have been exactly where you are right now. Tommy stepped forward. Lance Corporal Williams, my name is Tommy Johnson. I was medically discharged 3 weeks ago. I know exactly how you're feeling right now, and I'm here to tell you that you're not alone. There was a long pause, then the sound of movement. The door opened slowly, revealing a young Marine who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was still in his utility uniform, but it was wrinkled and disheveled. His eyes were red-rimmed and held the hollow look of someone who had lost hope. You were medically discharged, Williams asked, his voice hoarse. 3 weeks ago, nerve damage in my left leg from an IED explosion. They told me I couldn't meet physical standards anymore. Tommy's voice was matter-of-fact without self-pity. I spent 4 hours in a stairwell crying because I thought my life was over. Williams stared at him for a moment, then looked at Maria. And you are? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. I just retired after 12 years. Tommy and I met the day he got his discharge papers, and we've been working together ever since to help Marines like you through this transition. Working together how? Maria and Tommy exchanged glances. They hadn't planned to reveal their organization during their first crisis intervention, but the situation called for honesty. We're starting a nonprofit called Semper Fi Forward, Tommy explained. Veteran-to-veteran support for Marines transitioning to civilian life. Marines helping Marines. Williams stepped back from the doorway, gesturing for them to enter his room. It was spartanly clean despite his personal turmoil, muscle memory from years of military discipline. The only personal touches were a few photos on his desk, family members, fellow Marines, scenes from his hometown. Tell me about the training exercise, Maria said, settling into the room's single chair while Tommy and Williams sat on the bed. Williams was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was filled with pain and guilt. We were doing urban warfare training. One of our guys, Private Chen, got pinned when a piece of equipment shifted. Heavy stuff could have crushed him. I was closest, so I went in to help lift it off him. And that's when you got hurt. Yeah, lifted wrong, pulled something in my shoulder, but we got Chen out and he was okay. That's what mattered. Williams looked down at his hands. Except now they're saying I can't be a Marine anymore because of it, so maybe it wasn't worth it. Tommy leaned forward. Williams, look at me. Can I call you by your first name? Well, Mike. Mike, what you did was heroic. You put your teammate's safety above your own and you saved him from serious injury. That's what Marines do. The fact that it ended your military career doesn't make it less heroic. But what's the point of being heroic if it ruins your life? Maria spoke up. Mike, your life isn't ruined, it's changing direction, and I know that feels like the same thing right now, but it's not. Easy for you to say you chose to retire. I'm being thrown out. You're right, Maria acknowledged. My transition was voluntary, and that makes it completely different. But Tommy's wasn't voluntary, and he's sitting here 3 weeks later working on something that could help thousands of Marines. Your story doesn't end with your discharge papers. For the next 2 hours, they talked with Mike about his fears, his anger, his sense of loss. They didn't offer false reassurances or easy answers. Instead, they listened and shared their own experiences with uncertainty and fear. Gradually, Mike began to open up about his background, his goals, his sense of identity. I always wanted to be a teacher, he admitted eventually. Before I joined the Corps, I thought about studying education, but military service seemed more important, more meaningful. Why can't you still be a teacher? Tommy asked. Because I'm broken now. What school wants to hire someone who can't even stay in the military? Maria felt a familiar surge of protectiveness. Mike, you're not broken, you're injured. There's a difference. And any school district in the country would be lucky to have a Marine veteran as a teacher, especially one who sacrificed his military career to save a fellow Marine. You really think so? I know so. In fact, I think your experience could make you an even better teacher. You understand sacrifice, teamwork, leadership, and putting others first. Those are exactly the qualities we want in educators. By the time they left Camp Lejeune that evening, Mike Williams had agreed to several things. He would eat regular meals, he would continue talking with the base mental health counselors, and he would call Tommy every day for the next week. More importantly, he had agreed to consider applying to education programs for the following fall. That was intense, Tommy said as they drove away from the base. That was exactly what we're meant to be doing, Maria replied. Did you see the change in him when we talked about teaching? The way his whole demeanor shifted when he realized his military experience could be an asset instead of a liability. I did, and I saw something else too. What's that? Tommy was quiet for a moment, staring out at the North Carolina countryside. I saw how much difference it made that we understood what he was going through. When he realized we weren't just offering sympathy but actual empathy, that we'd been where he was, everything changed. Maria nodded. That's the foundation of what we're building, not just programs or services, but genuine understanding from people who have walked the same path. Marius? Yes. I think we're going to need more than 12 mentors. Maria smiled. I think you're right. I've got a feeling this thing is going to be bigger than we ever imagined. That night, back at Mrs. Patterson's house, they worked until nearly midnight refining their crisis intervention protocols based on their experience with Mike Williams. What they had learned in one day would reshape their entire approach to veteran support. The key is immediate response, Tommy said, updating their program guidelines. When someone reaches out in crisis, we need to be able to connect them with a mentor within hours, not days. And we need mentors who specialize in different types of transitions, Maria added. Medical discharge, voluntary separation, retirement, geographical relocation, each situation has unique challenges. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her own notebook, where she had been documenting their experience for training purposes. What about family support? Mike's parents didn't understand what he was going through. That probably made everything worse. Good point, we need resources for families too, helping them understand what their veteran is experiencing and how they can provide meaningful support. As they finally prepared for bed, Maria reflected on how much their organization had grown in just 3 weeks. What had started as an idea born from a chance encounter had already intervened in its first crisis situation. More importantly, they had proven to themselves that their approach worked. Tommy knocked on her door as she was settling in for the night. Maria, I wanted to thank you again, not just for helping me, but for showing me that my worst day could become the foundation for something meaningful. Tommy, you saved my life too. I was lost before I met you. Now I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. What's that? Taking care of Marines, same mission, new battlefield. As she turned off the light, Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from Mike Williams. Thank you for today. I'm going to be okay. She smiled in the darkness. 3 Marines, 3 different stories, but one shared understanding that no one had to face their battles alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help fellow veterans find their way forward. But tonight, it was enough to know that their work was making a difference. Outside, the North Carolina night was quiet except for the sound of wind in the trees. Inside, 3 people slept peacefully, knowing they had found their purpose in helping others find theirs. 6 months after their first meeting in the federal building stairwell, Semper Fi Forward had grown beyond Maria and Tommy's wildest expectations. Their small organization now served veterans across 15 states, with over 50 volunteer mentors and a waiting list of Marines seeking support. The cramped kitchen table operation at Mrs. Patterson's house had evolved into a proper office in downtown Charlotte, complete with a full-time staff of 3. Maria stood in front of the bathroom mirror in their new office, adjusting her civilian business suit for the 3rd time. Today was different from their usual operations. Today, they were hosting a ceremony that would change everything for their organization, and she was nervous in a way she hadn't been since her first combat deployment. You look fine, Tommy called from the main office where he was arranging chairs for their guests. His own transformation over the past 6 months had been remarkable. The broken young Marine from the stairwell had become a confident advocate for veteran services, completing his bachelor's degree online while running day-to-day operations for Semper Fi Forward. He walked with more confidence now, his slight limp barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. I still can't believe this is happening, Maria said, joining him in the main office. Through the windows, she could see news vans setting up in the parking lot. Local media had gotten wind of today's ceremony, and the story was apparently newsworthy enough to warrant live coverage. Mrs. Patterson bustled through the office, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries for their guests. At 72, she had become the unofficial grandmother of Semper Fi Forward, providing wisdom, stability, and homemade cookies to everyone who walked through their doors. She had also become surprisingly adept at media relations, charming reporters with her straightforward manner and obvious pride in her boys. "Stop fidgeting, both of you," she said firmly. "You've earned this recognition and you're going to accept it gracefully." The recognition she was referring to was a Presidential Volunteer Service Award, being presented to both Maria and Tommy for their work with veteran services. But that wasn't what had drawn media attention. The real story was the group of Marines who would be attending the ceremony, 500 active duty and retired Marines from across the southeastern United States, all coming to honor the two veterans who had turned a chance encounter into a lifeline for struggling service members. The idea had started small. Mike Williams, the Marine they had helped during their first crisis intervention, had wanted to do something special to thank Maria and Tommy. He had reached out to other Marines who had been helped by Semper Fi Forward, suggesting they all show up to support the ceremony. Word had spread through military networks, social media, and veteran organizations. What began as a small gesture of gratitude had snowballed into something unprecedented. "Ma'am, we've got Marines arriving from Virginia," announced Sarah Chen, their newest staff member and Mike Williams' girlfriend. She had joined the organization after graduating with a degree in social work, drawn by their mission and by Mike's transformation from suicidal despair to purposeful engagement. "The parking lot is filling up fast." Maria walked to the window and felt her breath catch. The parking lot and surrounding streets were indeed filling up, but not just with cars. Marines in dress blue uniforms were gathering in formation, their precision and bearing unmistakable even from a distance. Some were active duty, others were veterans like herself, but all shared the same purposeful demeanor that marked them as members of the Corps. "Tommy, come look at this," she said softly. Tommy joined her at the window and his eyes widened. "There have to be 200 Marines out there already and more are arriving." "More than that," Sarah said, checking her phone. "I'm getting messages from people who are still en route. Someone started a hashtag Semper Fi Forward and it's been trending all morning." The ceremony was scheduled for 11 o'clock, but by 10:30, it was clear that their small office couldn't accommodate the crowd that was gathering. Tommy made a quick decision to move the event outside, setting up a makeshift podium in the parking lot. The Marines, displaying the adaptability that was their hallmark, smoothly adjusted their formation to the new venue. At exactly 11 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up to the office. Congressman James Bradley, a Marine veteran himself, emerged carrying the official certificate for their award. He was accompanied by Colonel Martinez, the commanding officer from Camp Lejeune who had supported their work from the beginning. "Rodriguez Johnson," Colonel Martinez said, his voice carrying the authority of command but tempered with obvious pride. "I have to say, this is not what I expected when I agreed to present your award." Maria looked out at the sea of Marines and felt overwhelmed. "Sir, we had no idea this was going to happen." "That's because you've been too busy actually doing the work to notice the impact you've been having," Congressman Bradley said with a smile. "Do you too realize that your organization has directly assisted over 300 Marines in the past 6 months, and that's just the ones we know about?" The formal ceremony began with Colonel Martinez reading the citation for their Presidential Volunteer Service Award. But as he spoke, something unexpected happened. Without any signal or command, the assembled Marines began to stand at attention, their movements rippling through the crowd like a wave. Soon, every Marine present was standing in perfect formation, their respect and admiration visible in their bearing. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Mr. Johnson," Colonel Martinez continued, his voice carrying across the parking lot, "you have exemplified the highest traditions of Marine Corps service by extending your commitment to fellow Marines beyond your own military careers. Your organization, Semper Fi Forward, has provided critical support to Marines during one of the most challenging transitions they will ever face." Maria and Tommy stepped forward to accept their certificates, but as they did, something extraordinary began to happen. Starting with the Marines closest to the podium, hands began to rise in perfect military salutes. The gesture spread through the crowd until every Marine present was saluting them, 500 Marines acknowledging their service and sacrifice. Maria felt tears spring to her eyes. In 12 years of military service, she had received salutes from subordinates as a matter of protocol. But this was different. This was 500 Marines voluntarily expressing their respect and gratitude. This was validation that their work mattered, that they had found a way to continue serving even after leaving active duty. Tommy, standing beside her, was equally moved. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke into the microphone. Marines, this honor isn't just ours. Every person we've been able to help, every Marine who found hope when they thought there wasn't any, that's a victory for all of us. Because Marines don't abandon Marines, not on the battlefield and not in civilian life. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Without breaking their formation or dropping their salutes, the Marines began to cheer. It wasn't the rowdy enthusiasm of a sporting event, but the controlled, powerful expression of approval that marked Marine Corps culture. The sound echoed off the buildings around them, a testament to the bonds that connected these men and women across ranks, generations, and geographical boundaries. Congressman Bradley took the microphone next. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing here today is unprecedented. Never in my 15 years in Congress have I seen such a spontaneous demonstration of respect and gratitude from the military community. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Mr. Johnson have done something remarkable. They've created a bridge between military service and civilian life that honors both. As the formal ceremony concluded, the Marines didn't disperse as expected. Instead, they began to approach Maria and Tommy individually, each wanting to share a personal story or express their thanks. Some had been directly helped by Semper Fi Forward. Others had friends or family members who had been assisted. Many were active duty Marines who wanted to express their gratitude for the safety net that now existed for their fellow service members. "Ma'am," said a young lance corporal who couldn't have been more than 20, "my older brother was helped by your organization last month. He was in a really dark place after his discharge, but your mentor program connected him with someone who understood what he was going through. He's doing great now, started college, got a part-time job, has hope again. I just wanted to thank you for giving me my brother back." Similar stories were shared throughout the afternoon. A mother whose son had been guided through the transition to civilian employment. A wife whose husband had found purpose again after struggling with the loss of his military identity. A retired Marine who credited their organization with helping him realize that his service could continue in new forms. But perhaps the most moving moment came when Mike Williams approached the podium. The same Marine who had been contemplating suicide just 6 months earlier now stood tall and confident, wearing a suit instead of a uniform, but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. "6 months ago, I was sitting in a barracks room, convinced that my life was over," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "Two Marines came to see me that day, Marines who had been exactly where I was, who understood my pain and my fear. They didn't offer me false comfort or easy answers. They offered me hope, and they backed up that hope with concrete support." He paused, looking directly at Maria and Tommy. "Today, I'm proud to tell you that I've been accepted into the education program at East Carolina University. This fall, I'll begin studying to become a high school history teacher. More importantly, I'll begin the next chapter of my life knowing that my best days are ahead of me, not behind me." The crowd erupted in applause, and Maria felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was why they had started Semper Fi Forward, not for recognition or awards, but for moments like this. For young Marines like Mike who found their way forward instead of giving up. For the ripple effect that occurred when one person's life was saved and transformed. As the afternoon wore on and the Marines began to return to their home bases, Maria and Tommy found themselves standing alone in the parking lot, still processing what had happened. "Can you believe this started with you crying in a stairwell?" Maria asked, shaking her head in wonder. Tommy laughed, the sound filled with joy and amazement. "Can you believe this started with you deciding to help a stranger?" Mrs. Patterson approached them, carrying a folder filled with business cards and contact information from Marines who wanted to volunteer with their organization. "You too realize what you've started, don't you? This isn't just about helping individual Marines anymore. You've created a movement." As they walked back into their office, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, she had been dreading her transition to civilian life, uncertain about her purpose and direction. Today, she was the co-founder of an organization that was changing lives across the country. The military had taught her to lead, to serve, and to never leave anyone behind. Semper Fi Forward had shown her how to continue doing all of those things as a civilian. That evening, as they celebrated with their staff and volunteers, Tommy pulled Maria aside. "I've been thinking about something all day." "What's that?" "Those 500 Marines who showed up today, they weren't just honoring us. They were honoring every Marine who's ever struggled with transition, every veteran who's ever felt lost or forgotten. They were making a statement that the Corps takes care of its own, even after discharge." Maria nodded, understanding completely. "And they were proving that our work matters, that we're meeting a real need in the veteran community." "So what's next?" Tommy asked. "We've got more demand than we can handle, more volunteers than we can train, and more opportunities than we can pursue. How do we grow without losing what makes us special?" Maria smiled, feeling the same excitement she had felt during their flight to North Carolina 6 months earlier. "We do what Marines have always done. We adapt, we overcome, and we never leave anyone behind." As they prepared to lock up the office and head home, Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of a young Marine in dress blues standing outside a college administration building with a caption that read, "Just enrolled for the fall semester. Thank you for showing me that my story doesn't end with my discharge papers. Semper Fi." Maria showed the message to Tommy, who grinned widely. Another success story. Another Marine who's moving forward instead of giving up. As they walked to their cars, Maria realized that the ceremony that day had marked more than just recognition for their work. It had marked the moment when Semper Fi Forward evolved from a small nonprofit to a genuine movement within the Marine Corps community. The 500 Marines who had saluted them weren't just expressing gratitude. They were expressing commitment to the principle that Marines take care of Marines, always and without exception. The next morning would bring new challenges, new Marines who needed support, and new opportunities to expand their impact. But tonight, it was enough to know that they had created something meaningful and lasting, a bridge between military service and civilian life that honored both while helping Marines transition successfully from one to the other. The drive home through Charlotte's quiet streets gave Maria time to reflect on the unexpected direction her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been preparing for the end of her military career. Tonight, she was planning the expansion of an organization that would outlast any individual career, continuing the mission of caring for Marines for generations to come. Sometimes the most important missions were the ones you never saw coming, and sometimes the best way to end one chapter of service was to begin another. 2 years had passed since that unforgettable day when 500 Marines gathered in a Charlotte parking lot to honor Maria Rodriguez and Tommy Johnson. Semper Fi Forward had grown from a kitchen table operation into a national organization with chapters in all 50 states and partnerships with major military installations worldwide. But despite their success, Maria often found herself thinking about that first encounter in the federal building stairwell, remembering how a moment of simple human kindness had sparked something extraordinary. Today marked another milestone in their journey. Maria stood before the mirror in her hotel room at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C., adjusting her dress uniform one final time. At 36, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling. The reflection looking back at her showed a woman who had successfully navigated the transition from military service to civilian leadership, but who had never forgotten her roots as a Marine. Downstairs in the hotel's grand ballroom, over 800 guests were gathering for the second annual Semper Fi Forward Gala. The event had become one of the premier fundraising gatherings for veteran services, drawing corporate sponsors, military leadership, and politicians from across the country. This year's guest list included the Secretary of Defense, 3 four-star generals, and dozens of Marines whose lives had been transformed by their organization's work. Tommy appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his own formal attire. His transformation over the past 2 years had been even more dramatic than Maria's. The young Marine who had once contemplated ending his life in a base barracks had become one of the most respected advocates for veteran services in the country. He had completed his master's degree in social work while running Semper Fi Forward's day-to-day operations, and was frequently invited to speak at conferences and congressional hearings about veteran transition issues. "You ready for this?" he asked, straightening his bow tie nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be," Maria replied. "You." Terrified and excited in equal measure. 2 years ago, I was crying in a stairwell. Tonight, I'm giving the keynote address at an event that will raise over $2 million for veteran services. Sometimes I think I must be dreaming. Maria smiled, remembering her own disbelief during those early days. "I know the feeling, but you've earned this moment, Tommy. We both have." They made their way downstairs to the ballroom, where the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The room was filled with Marines from every era of service, Vietnam veterans mingling with recent returnees from Afghanistan, retired generals chatting with young corporals, families of fallen Marines standing alongside active duty personnel. The common thread connecting them all was their shared commitment to the principle that Marines take care of their own. Mrs. Patterson, now 74 and serving as Semper Fi Forward's Director of Family Services, approached them with her characteristic warm smile. She had become something of a celebrity in military circles, known for her fierce advocacy on behalf of veteran families and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. "The press wants a few photos before dinner," she announced, "and General Morrison would like a word with you both before the ceremony begins." General Morrison was the current commandant of the Marine Corps, a soft-spoken but formidable leader who had supported Semper Fi Forward since its early days. His presence at tonight's event represented official recognition of their organization's importance to the Marine Corps community. They found the general in a quiet corner of the ballroom, surrounded by his security detail but clearly eager for a private conversation. Despite his rank and authority, he greeted them both with the warmth of an old friend. "Rodriguez Johnson," he said, shaking their hands firmly. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you've accomplished. The metrics speak for themselves. Over 4,000 Marines successfully transitioned with your organization's help. Suicide rates among recently discharged Marines down by 37% in regions where you operate. Employment rates among veteran participants 92% above national averages. But the real measure of your success is something that can't be quantified." "What's that, sir?" Tommy asked. "Hope. You've given hope to Marines who thought their best days were behind them. You've shown them that leaving the Corps doesn't mean abandoning the values and brotherhood that defined their service." The general paused, his expression becoming more personal. "My own son went through a difficult transition when he left the Army 2 years ago. Your organization helped him find his way. For that, I will always be grateful." As they prepared for dinner service, Maria found herself scanning the crowd and recognizing faces from their journey. Mike Williams was there with his wife Sarah, both now working as educators in North Carolina and serving as volunteer coordinators for Semper Fi Forward's education support program. Sergeant Martinez from Camp Lejeune had brought several Marines from his current command. Even the clerk from the Veterans Affairs office in Los Angeles had come, wearing a volunteer badge and beaming with pride at being part of something meaningful. But the most significant presence in the room was harder to quantify. As Maria looked around the ballroom, she realized that nearly every person present had been touched by their organization in some way. Some were Marines who had received direct assistance. Others were family members who had watched their loved ones transform from despair to hope. Many were volunteers who had found their own sense of purpose through helping fellow veterans. The evening's program began with a video presentation showcasing Semper Fi Forward's impact over the past 2 years. Success stories flowed across the screen. Former Marines who had started businesses, completed college degrees, found meaningful careers, and rebuilt their lives after military service. Each story was different, but all shared common themes of resilience, brotherhood, and the power of having someone who understood their journey. When Tommy took the podium to deliver his keynote address, the room fell silent. His journey from suicidal despair to national leadership had become legendary within military circles, but he had never publicly shared the full details of his darkest moment. "2 years ago," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I was sitting in a stairwell of the federal building in Los Angeles, convinced that my life was over. I had just received my medical discharge papers from the Marine Corps, and I couldn't see any future beyond that moment. I was 23 years old, and I believed my best days were behind me." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. What I didn't know was that one floor above me, another Marine was completing her own transition from military service. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was facing her own uncertainties about civilian life, her own questions about purpose and identity. But when she heard someone in distress, she didn't hesitate. She came looking for me. Tommy's eyes found Maria in the audience and he smiled. That act of kindness, that simple decision to help a fellow Marine, changed both of our lives forever. It reminded me that being a Marine isn't just about wearing the uniform. It's about the values we carry, the commitments we make, and the way we treat each other long after our active service ends. He went on to describe their journey together, from that first flight to North Carolina through the growth of Semper Fi Forward into a national organization. But his focus remained on the individual Marines they had helped, the families they had supported, and the communities they had strengthened. "Tonight, I want you to meet some of the Marines who prove that our work matters," Tommy said, gesturing to the audience. "Would all the Marines who have been helped by Semper Fi Forward please stand?" Throughout the ballroom, people began to rise, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Soon, nearly half the audience was standing, representing Marines from every branch of service, every era of conflict, and every background imaginable. The sight was overwhelming, a visual representation of the lives that had been touched and transformed. "These Marines represent more than individual success stories," Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger. "They represent the truth that no Marine fights alone, that our obligations to each other don't end when we leave active duty, and that the values we learned in service can guide us through any transition." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Tommy wasn't finished. "But I also want you to meet the Marine who made all of this possible. The Marine who taught me that helping others is the best way to help yourself. The Marine who turned her own uncertainty into a mission to serve others. Ladies and gentlemen, my partner in building Semper Fi Forward and my friend, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez." Maria had not expected to speak at the event, but as she made her way to the podium amid sustained applause, she knew what she wanted to say. Looking out at the audience of Marines, families, and supporters, she felt the same sense of purpose that had driven her throughout her military career. Thank you, Tommy, for those generous words, but I think you've got the story backwards, she said with a smile. You didn't need saving that day in the stairwell. You needed someone to remind you of what you already knew, that Marines are resilient, that we adapt and overcome, and that we never give up on each other. She paused, gathering her thoughts. What Tommy and I discovered that day is something the Marine Corps has always known. The strongest weapon we have isn't our training or our equipment, it's our commitment to each other. It's the promise that no Marine stands alone, whether in combat or in the challenge of transitioning to civilian life. Maria's voice grew more passionate as she continued. Every Marine in this room knows that moment when you realize your military career is ending. For some, it comes after a full career of service. For others, like Tommy, it comes unexpectedly through injury or circumstances beyond your control. But what we've learned through Semper Fi Forward is that ending military service doesn't mean ending your mission to serve. The audience was completely engaged now, nodding in recognition of their own experiences. The Marine sitting next to you might be struggling with the transition to civilian employment. The veteran across the room might be dealing with invisible wounds that make daily life a challenge. The family member in the back might be trying to understand how to support their Marine through this difficult time. Each of these situations is an opportunity to live up to our values, to demonstrate that Semper Fidelis isn't just a motto, it's a way of life. Maria concluded by sharing the latest numbers from their organization's impact. In 2 years, Semper Fi Forward had expanded to serve all branches of military service, not just Marines. They had developed specialized programs for combat veterans, military families, and veterans with disabilities. Their job placement rate had reached 94%, and their crisis intervention program had responded to over 600 emergency situations. But the statistic that mattered most to Maria was simpler: 0 suicides among Marines who had completed their full transition program. 0 families destroyed because a veteran couldn't find their way forward. 0 Marines left behind. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their farewells, Maria found herself in conversation with a young Air Force veteran who had just completed Semper Fi Forward's career transition program. "Ma'am," the young woman said, "I wanted to thank you for what you've built here. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in my car, convinced I was unemployable because of my PTSD. Tonight, I'm a project manager for a defense contractor, I have my own apartment, and I'm taking college classes. But more than that, I have hope again." These were the conversations that reminded Maria why their work mattered. Not the awards or recognition, not the media attention or political support, but the individual lives that were transformed from despair to hope. As she and Tommy prepared to leave the hotel, they walked past a display case that had been set up near the ballroom entrance. Inside were artifacts from their journey, the original legal pad where they had sketched their first organizational plans in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, photos from their early crisis interventions, letters from Marines they had helped, and newspaper clippings documenting their growth. But the centerpiece of the display was something that always brought tears to Maria's eyes: a framed photo from that day 2 years ago when 500 Marines had gathered in a Charlotte parking lot to salute them. The image captured the moment when their organization had transformed from a small nonprofit to a movement, when they had realized they were part of something larger than themselves. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help me that day?" Tommy asked as they stood before the display. Maria considered the question seriously. "I think about it all the time, but I also think about what would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to accept help when you needed it. This whole thing started because 2 Marines were willing to be vulnerable with each other. And look what came from that vulnerability." As they walked through the hotel lobby toward the exit, Maria reflected on how much their lives had changed since that first encounter. Tommy had found his calling as an advocate for veteran services and was considering running for Congress to expand their impact through legislation. Mrs. Patterson had become a nationally recognized expert on military family support. Mike Williams was finishing his teaching degree and planning to start a Semper Fi Forward chapter in his school district. And Maria herself had discovered that her transition from military service wasn't an ending but a transformation. She was still serving Marines, still leading people through difficult challenges, still living up to the values that had defined her military career. The mission had evolved, but it had never ended. Outside the hotel, Washington, D.C. glittered with the lights of monuments and government buildings. Somewhere in the city, there were probably veterans struggling with their own transitions, facing the same fears and uncertainties that had brought Maria and Tommy together. Tomorrow, Semper Fi Forward would be there to help them, just as they had been there for thousands of Marines over the past 2 years. The story that had begun with 2 Marines in a stairwell had become a national movement. The simple act of stopping to help someone in distress had grown into an organization that touched lives across the country. And at its heart, it remained what it had always been: one Marine helping another, proving that the bonds of service and brotherhood extend far beyond military uniforms. As Maria drove through the quiet streets toward her hotel, she thought about tomorrow's schedule: congressional hearings on veteran services legislation, meetings with corporate sponsors interested in expanding their support, site visits to